Dangers and Discoveries in Northern Mozambique is the title of my talk tonight. It centres on probably the last 15 years of my life working in that part of Africa, primarily Malawi and also Mozambique, in a variety of different capacities, with a particular focus on the mountain Inselbergs that we find in this part of Africa. The main point, or the first point to take away from this, is that they're very, very old. We're looking at mountains that are 130 to 500 million years old. For those who don't know what an Inselberg is, it's a small mountain arising abruptly from the surrounding plains. In our case, it's made of granite, which is an igneous rock, through the cooling of lava. And these mountains, they form these island biodiversities that rise out of the African, biodiversity hotspots that rise out of the African plains. As a result, they have a unique biological fauna and flora that has been often overlooked up until now, and we tend to find these isolated patches of wet forest or rainforest in which we discover all of these new species. This is an example of one of the most famous Inselbergs. This is Mount Mulanje in Malawi, which is on the border of Mozambique. We're just jumping across the border here a little bit. This has an Oxford connection because J.R. Tolkien, before he wrote his Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and everything, is said to have walked Mount Mulanje and got the inspiration for a lot of the landscape that you see. In Malawi you have the Shiri River, and obviously in the books you have the Shire, and then you obviously have the mountain ranges and Mordor, and anybody who's been to Mulanje on a stormy day in the middle of the rainy season, as certainly Jens has, it is very Mordor-like. Northern Mozambique is an interesting place. It's a very interesting place, largely unexplored due to Mozambique's history, the conflict situations that have occurred in this part of Africa. You've looked at a war of independence, then followed by a very long, protracted, bloody civil war. Traditionally, it was a farming area, and possibly now there's even fewer people than there was maybe 50 years ago as a result of the fighting and generally all the troubles that have been occurring there. However, it is now changing fast with the discovery of oil and gas that we find off the coast and the emergence of large-scale farming. We're seeing a lot of the woodlands cut down for cattle farming. A lot of Brazilian farmers are coming in, and it's got quite a few environmental issues and problems that need to be addressed. As you go around northern Mozambique, you come across the relics of war. You can still see evidence of those days of that fighting in the burnt-out army trucks and other things that you see on the side of the road. The Independence War was from 64 to 74, and then they didn't really have much peace before they descended into a civil war from 1977 to 92. Let's come back to the theme of exploration. When we think of the explorer, images such as from the Victorian age come to mind. The great explorers of the Victorian era, and certainly those involved in Africa, such as Livingstone and Stanley and Mungo Park, come to mind. And that begs the question, really, what has changed since those days? Maybe the motives have changed. In the Victorian era, they were often looking for lands for economic reasons to expand the British Empire. We are more concerned with conservation and trying to protect the last remaining patches of areas of high biodiversity. Maybe we have more modern equipment than they had in those days, but certainly there's a few similar trademarks, such as finding new species, and particularly the hat. The explorer traditionally travels by four modes of transport: by foot, by bicycle, that's a bicycle, by motorized vehicle, and of course by biplane. We can say that the modes of transport haven't changed that much since these days, and we also use similar forms of transport, and possibly even biplanes. When you imagine expeditions in days of yore, you see long lines of porters carrying supplies and equipment and food and camping gear. Today, we see long lines of people carrying food and equipment and camping gear. So not much has changed in that capacity. The camps in those days, in the age of the great explorers, were obviously tented, where they cooked in the ground with traditional means and foods. And today, it's slightly similar, although it's not in black and white. So a lot of stuff hasn't changed. Maps. Now, if we look at some of the maps, these are particularly relevant maps for the area of Africa that we are looking at, which is northern Mozambique. The map on the left was created by J.T. Last in 1887, and the map on the right from Google Earth 130 odd years later. One is a hard copy done by precise field mapping techniques at the time, and the other one is from a satellite. And as you can see, the map on the left, produced by J.T. Last, is actually fairly good. It's not bad at all. Considering the means that they had at the time, I think it's a fairly accurate representation. J.T. Last was a explorer sent out by the Royal Geographic Society in 1887 to explore these lands, to explore the mountains of northern Mozambique for economic reasons. He writes, "It was a time of man-eating lions and cannibalistic natives. As we went along, people came out with a great noise, and the chief sang out that he wanted my helmet to wear and my skull to use as a drinking cap." I did not agree with him on that subject. Jack Vincent was another explorer from those days. He was quite a famous birder. He came in the 1930s exploring these lands, and he came in through Malawi, through the town of Blantyre, and then the border town of Mulanje. Jack Vincent writes at the time, he got detained in a rugby match as well, which is quite an interesting story, where he only agreed to do it if he could have a lift home after the match. The first available vehicle after the rugby match left over 24 hours later. Mulanje was a terribly hard drinking place, and in my opinion, it must, at that time, have come near to holding the colonial record for hard liquor consumption. Parts of West Africa were reputedly the worst, but I had seen some of the notorious centres there, and Mulanje had them stone cold. I spent 6 years in Mulanje. So what's changed then? Not that much in terms of an everyday experience. Vehicles drive to the end of the road. We then leave those vehicles, we go to local villages, we talk to the chiefs then organise the villages, and they designate porters who then take us to our base camp. The base camp is normally discovered through a reconnaissance mission, weeks or months or even years earlier. And all of the camping equipment, tents, food, everything is carried to the base camp where we cook on gas. Equipment such as butterfly nets, plant presses, bat nets are all essentially the same since these early Victorian explorers, and most of the dangers are the same, exception of maybe lions and cannibals. What's changed? A lot of taxonomy has changed with the emergence of DNA analysis for identifying what is a new species or what is not a new species. This is a whole new field of taxonomy that's come about in the last 20 odd years. And technological tools have changed, such as camera traps, global positioning systems, geographical information systems, satellite imagery, drones, helicopters, and even microlights. Coming back to our sites, I'm now going to run through a selection of these mountains. This is a digital terrain model of this part of northern Mozambique. We're going to start off with Mount Makula, and we're going to come down to Mount Yao, and then pick out a few other mountains along the way. Obviously, we're going to talk a little bit about Mabu, and we're going to finish by presenting some first ever seen footage of a new site. First of all, a few acknowledgements. Our project partners that I've been very honoured and lucky to work with over the years. The Agricultural Department of Mozambique, the African Butterfly Research Institute, based in Kenya, Royal Botanic Gardens Kew, based here in Richmond, BirdLife International, the Government of Malawi, the Darwin Initiative, and the Mulanje Mountain Conservation Trust. But notable Africans and colleagues of mine that I've become very close friends, that I've been honoured to work with, are Hassan Patel, a botanist from Malawi. He looks a bit like Yoda. We've been to the top of every mountain in northern Mozambique, or every mountain that I've visited, I've been with Hassam. So we've been working together now for some 15 odd years. Afelio Cavallo is the local hunter that I first used when I went to Mount Mabu. He actually saved my life because as I came into Mabu, as you'll see later, this is a story that I'll tell you about, he actually pulled me back and prevented me stepping on one of his traps. The trap was very big, and you'll see this later. And Martin Hassan from the African Butterfly Research Institute, arguably the best butterfly specialist, African butterfly specialist in Africa. From the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew, on the botany side, we have Jonathan Timberlake. We have, let's throw in Tom there. He doesn't look like this now because this picture was taken some 6 odd years ago. Paul Smith, who I believe is now left Kew, and Tim Harris. Birders and birders, Ron Denis, we have Lincoln Fishpool, Claire Spottiswood, and of course the Dowsetts, a formidable couple, but very knowledgeable and always right. The butterflies from Abury. On the top left, we have the late, great Ivan Bampton. You'll see a little bit more of him later. Colin Condon, you'll see more of him later. Myself, Martin, Steve in the middle, again Colin, and there we all are again at the bottom of a tree in Marbu. And especially Colin.
My name is Colin Congdon. I'm 75 years old, and I've come here to Mount Mabu in Mozambique to look for butterflies. And there are lots here. Well, I spend 9 months of the year in Africa researching the life histories, recording from the egg to the caterpillar to the chrysalis and then the adult, photographing every stage, getting the plants properly identified by scientists at Kew, and then publishing the results. Did I get that one? No, I didn't. But that one, no, again. Oh, they're suddenly, from being none at all, they're being surrounded by butterflies. Woo! It sometimes works. Now, this is a thing called Lachnoptera. But it's an old, worn specimen, and we've seen this thing before, so I think we can safely say, on your way.
And of course the family. It wouldn't be right and proper to spend most of your adult life in Africa without your mother and father coming to join you on several of the expeditions, especially your father several times. And obviously on the right-hand side, my long-suffering and dearest partner of mine, and of course the next generation, who's also at the door. Okay, let's get back to the sites then. We're going to start with Mount Makula in the north. Makula is very interesting. It's the northernmost mountain on the Tanzanian border. It's interesting for a number of reasons, but historically it's got a connection with the First World War and German East Africa when the Germans occupied or ran Tanzania. It was then invaded by the British. The general in charge of the German East African forces was General Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck, otherwise known as the Lion of Africa. He was commander of the German forces, some 14,000 men, who held back over 300,000 British. And he was one of the first people who successfully developed the guerrilla warfare tactic. He used Mount Makula as one of his bases, and so he retreated across the border into northern Mozambique, and actually him and his forces held out at the top of Mount Makula. And if you actually go there, you can actually see the remains of beautifully laid or nicely organized pathways and stones, and all beautifully organized. He was never captured, he was never defeated, and for that he goes down in the history books. From the summit we can see a commanding view over northern Mozambique. It now has aerials on the top. And these are some of the images from our expedition there. Claire on the top right, top left, sorry. The birds. It's still a very wild place, Malika catching butterflies. It's still a very wild place because of lions and buffaloes and this long grass. So we always used to have game guards with us wherever we went. Some of the new species we found were new species of Bayliss butterfly, a new species of crab, a new record of a bat for Mozambique. Next to, well, going east-west of Makula, 150 kilometers, we come to Mount Yao. Mount Yao is also in Nyasa province and also very interesting. Now, Makula has been visited by biologists before. There's been a reasonable amount of biological survey, but to the best of our records, we were the first biologists to visit Mount Yao. It rises to 1,500 meters and has this strange habitat type of a swamp forest and also this cloud woodland, which you don't normally see because it normally at that level with that moisture, it becomes forest. So quite an interesting place. Here we are looking around the swamp forest and we come across a whiskey bottle. A Wyatt and Mackay whiskey bottle. And there's us thinking that we're the first Westerners ever to be there. We get up to the summit and these rusty old tin cans bashing about the summit of the mountain. So we dig a bit deeper and we try and find out what's going on here. And the Portuguese had a helicopter stationed up there during the War of Independence. So the soldiers, obviously, or the pilots or the helicopter crew, at one point decided to go and drink a bottle of whiskey in the swamp forest. We didn't find any bones. Well, then we didn't dig that deep. So new species from Mount Yao are the Bayliss butterfly. We've got new species of iris. This is quite exciting. You don't normally come across an iris. This is the Morea. This is now being called Morea nyasica, I believe. A very beautiful flower. We come to the first of our dangers, bridges. Bridges. When bridges collapse, they're often not replaced. And that means when the concrete gets washed away, then logs and trees and all sorts of bits and pieces are put across to bridge the gap for the vehicles to drive across. The drops are often very deep, as you can see, and if you go down with your vehicle, you'll certainly lose your vehicle. It'll be very difficult to get it out. Crossing bridges in northern Mozambique is a dangerous occurrence. This is a bridge which connects to Mount Mabu over the river Lugela. This bridge, which is the same bridge as this one here, this was taken maybe 6 years ago. This bridge has now completely disappeared. It's gone. There's nothing left. So on our last visit to Mabu, we then had to do a detour via Makuba. So we had a 12-hour journey instead of a 2.5-hour journey. Bridge is also very useful, which is why you actually take a bit of a risk to cross them. The next of our sites is Mount Inago. We're going further south here. Inago is really a classic Inselberg landscape. It has these granite domes rising out of the plain in an almost sort of Picasso-style imagery with sort of faces almost coming out of them. It's a very dramatic and beautiful landscape, this mountain range. When you get up and into the massif, you have these open valleys coming down here, these rising peaks, and you can see the smooth granite here, and these are often known as whalebacks for obvious reasons. On Mount Inago, we found this species of cycad. It was growing all over and down in between the rocks. The cycad is a prehistoric plant. We try to get to an identification on that, but maybe that might be a new species. Certainly ones we did find, new species of crab, new species of bat, new species of butterfly, and this pygmy chameleon. This pygmy chameleon, when fully grown, is maybe 2 inches long. Next to Mount Inago is the Namuli Massif. This is the second highest mountain in Mozambique, rising to 2,400 meters. Again, you can see these classic sort of granite domes. You're starting to get a picture of what the landscape looks like in northern Mozambique. But there's also these forest patches with these sort of bai-like areas, and in the ravines and gorges, you've got some dense forest. Inago, the site before, is under extreme threat. The forest patches are now down to about 10 to 20 hectares in size. So all those new species, those pygmy chameleons, the butterflies, are really at the end of their viable existence unless something happens. Namuli is also suffering badly. The forests are getting cleared at an alarming rate. We'll come to this maybe a little bit later, but they're getting cleared for things like potatoes. Very strange. It's not really commercial logging, it's agriculture. It's because the soils are peaty and rich. Species that we found here, again, crab, a pygmy chameleon, a bat, and also this new species of viper. You're starting to see a pattern here in the groups of species that we're finding. The crabs, the butterflies, some bats, the pygmy chameleons. A lot of these things, well, the bats is rather special because these are new species of mammal, and a mammal is also very exciting. And that's what you can use as a flagship or an umbrella to help protect the place. A lot of these other species, like the chameleons, like the crabs, like the butterflies, are very sedentary. That means they don't move outside the forest very far. And so when they're isolated in these forest patches, then they stay there for a long time and speciate. Here's some of the butterflies that we got. Beautiful. This is the male, and that's the female, by the way. So that's one species. Yeah, okay, so this is coming to our second danger now. This is, some of you might get this. This is Fakari grass, and this is extremely dangerous because of buffaloes and lions and various navigation issues. Often it's very easy to get lost. That's a person there, and that's a person there. That's Sebastian. He's actually trying to find a way for the Land Cruiser to get through. So this is what we're driving through here on this occasion. But it comes with all sorts of dangers, such as the large mammals, lions and elephants, and especially buffaloes. And buffaloes are really dangerous, especially if you come across them in the grass. But one of the other reasons that it's also very dangerous is because of ticks. And on one occasion, I walked into the wrong bush, and I got covered in maybe 50 of these, and I had a reaction. These were the little pepper ticks, which are the newly emerged ticks, and I was covered, itching, and I went into some form of toxic shock, and this lasted for 3 months. 2 or 3 times a week, this would happen. And the whole of my face would swell up and everything else. Very nasty, not particularly nice to look at. But it is in there as one of the dangers. And a very real danger from very small little pin. And these pepper ticks are less than pinhead. You can't even see them. You just feel the itch and the welt. And horrible. Moving on. We're jumping back across the border here, back into Malawi. This is Mangochi Mountain. The reason I'm putting this in is because I've had camera traps running there for 4 years now. And it is certainly one of the new tools that we have in terms of exploration and discovery. A bit of history, it's interesting. The British built a fort there in 1860 or 1870 after the defeat of the Yao chief Zarifi. And the remains of that fort are still there. This is it was largely staffed by a Sikh regiment from the King's African Rifles. And there's the entrance, and the entrance, it's all still there. So there's quite a lot of history still going there and a lot of archaeology. In 1906, the British Army sent a captain, Captain Percival of the 1st Brigade of the King's African Rifles, to evaluate the fort in terms of its suitability as a defensive position. He said it's looked down upon all 3 sides and little cover from artillery fire, except from one side on the west. He went on to say the fort is utterly useless for defence against 1 artillery, 2 modern rifles, or any species of breech loader firing ball, and would be excessively uncomfortable even when cap guns and flintlocks were used. So it's useless. It's more of a power position. Anyway, back to the reason that we're here. Camera trap footage. So I've had these camera traps running for, 4 odd years now, maybe 10 or 15 of them, depending on how many are left whenever I go back to check them. Camera traps are very useful. They're very useful for looking at the species that are there, especially in hidden and dark places, such as forests, also looking at population densities and things like that. So they're waterproof, they're motion sensing, day and night they can work, they can have battery packs of up to 12 or 24, and they can be operational for a year or 2. Very effective. Let me just show you some footage. Here's some elephants. Can you see all of that? Some day shot for you there, some nighttime footage. And some leopards. And you've got to look here, by the way, for this one. I get quite a lot of leopard, it's quite nice. I've only put 2 images in here, but pretty much every time I go up and check the traps, I've got some nice leopard footage. And of course, poachers, who seem to not notice this big this box strapped around a tree looking at them, but anyway, I think they're more interested in finding monkeys or something like that. And indeed, the same hunters 3 years later. It's behind you. One of the tools we very rarely have access to is a helicopter. But on rare occasion, I have the fortune to have access to one of these. A couple of our sites, Mangoti in particular, border some of the national parks that are managed by the African Parks Network, and they have a lot of money and they have a lot of resources, including helicopters. So when we talk very nicely to them, they let us use these helicopters on occasion. What we're trying to do is look at areas of deforestation, trying to find out where people are making charcoal pits and all that sort of stuff. But as you can see, they're also very useful here. This is an elephant carcass. So you can actually monitor poaching, which is the reason they have them. And it's very effective for that. Let's come to Mabu. Mabu is a particularly beautiful site. Let's start with this image. This is the main camp at Mabu, and it's been called a lost Eden, and I think it is worthy of that title. It is a rainforest paradise. It rises to over 1,700 meters and covers an area of about 8,000 hectares, or the forest does, and still it's in relatively good condition. I was there about a month or so ago, and I did not see any destruction, encroachment, cutting of trees, etc. There's a largely derelict tea estate that borders it, as you have to drive through to get to it. Since 2005, when I made the first visit, I've made over 10 visits to this site now, probably more than any site I've been to in this part of Africa. As we found many new species, and like I say, it's known as the largest continuous block of medium altitude rainforest in southern Africa. These are some of the earlier photos from the first visit in 2005. This is actually tea. This is what happens to a tea estate when you don't do anything for 20 years. Tea is naturally a shrub some 30 foot high. It's not this little thing that you pluck from the ground. This is the main peak of Mabu, and this is the tea here. This is our first trip in 2005. This is Claire Spottiswoode, Erica Mann, Hassan Patel. And this is when we walked up 3/4 of the way up this part of the mountain here. We ran out of water, but we just got to over the lip where we could look down and see the start of the rainforest. We then calculated the size of this rainforest here, and then we were able to determine its size. And then it transpired that it actually, as a single block, it was the largest in southern Africa. Notable events in the history of Mabu since 2005 have been the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew Darwin Initiative expedition in 2008, led by Jonathan Timberlake, and of course with a large involvement from the African Butterfly Research Institute. This is the late great Ivan Bampton. So there I am backnetting up near the summit. I get up, it's a nice sunny morning, I decide to walk to the summit and look down over this beautiful rainforest and eat what nuts I've got or whatever. And I look around and there's Ivan. Now the base camp is some 600 meters below, and it's a very steep climb to get up here. And there's Ivan's in his 80s by this point, right? And there he is. And it's about 9 o'clock in the morning, so he must have set off at 6 or something like that, and he's walked all the way up to the top. No water, because he never carried water. And yeah, I mean, it was just an amazing sight to see him emerge out of the forest so early in the morning on the summit from the main camp. And here we have the good Dr. Roland and, of course, Colin. And I guess it's all about the size of the net. Right, in 2010, I took the BBC Natural History Unit to film the butterfly sequence for the Africa series. I don't know if any of you saw that. It was particularly beautiful. We'll see it in a minute now. And my job was to catch the butterflies along with Colin, cool them down overnight, and then make up a sugar solution, which we then put in strategic places. And the butterflies came out in the morning, where they then fed, and they were able to film. A little bit of background there for you. Anyway, so but it was beautiful, and you'll see this is Justin Maguire, who was absolutely he was the only cameraman actually, just one guy, and a producer.
As the clouds drift inland, they bring rain to one of the least explored corners of our planet, the mountains of Mozambique. This is the wettest place in southern Africa. Decades of civil war have kept travellers away from this little-known land. It was satellite mapping that revealed the full extent of the forest that grows here. So now it's known to outsiders as the Google rainforest. It could also be called the butterfly forest. After the rains, butterflies have emerged together in huge numbers. As soon as their wings dry out, they will take to the air. Their goal? To find a mate. But how? There may be thousands close by, but the foliage is so thick it's difficult for them to find each other. They have a remarkable solution. They follow rivers upstream and travel to higher ground. The journey can take hours of determined flying. Eventually, they emerge into the only open space there is. The treeless peak of Mount Mabu. Up here, free from the confines of the forest, they hold a butterfly ball. Now the butterflies have all the space they need for their aerobatic courtship. The male's strategy is simple. Fly higher and faster than the competition, and just maybe you'll win a virgin female. This spectacular gathering, unseen by outsiders until now, happens for just half an hour each morning, and for just a few weeks in the year. Once mated, the females descend back to the rainforest to lay their eggs. A forest that only exists because of moisture rising from the warm Agulhas current, hundreds of miles away in the Indian Ocean.
Moving on. Our third danger, and one of the ones that really worries me, are gin traps, derived from the word engine. I had to look that one up, but yeah, gin trap. On the right here, we can see Hassan Patel with probably one of the largest gin traps I've ever had the unfortunate, and this is the one I nearly stepped on, by the way. So this is Athelios, the hunter that I always use, and I came down into the forest, and they're always set in paths. And then he pulled me back and he popped this thing out the ground. And, this is a klipspringer, a mountain antelope, dead obviously, died a very horrible death. That's a bush squirrel, which obviously I released, and also a banded mongoose. Now, the gin trap is a trap of choice for hunters because it doesn't kill the animals. It doesn't kill them for like 5 or 6 days or a week or something like that. So the hunter can set them and do his rounds 5 days later, a week later, and the animal potentially still alive, which means the flesh is still fresh. It's highly cruel. They're banned in the UK. Well, they're banned to use in the UK. They're not banned to own. This is the gin trap. This is Othelio with his large trap here. You set it in the ground, and actually you bury it, so you can't actually see it, as this will show you here. So this is now, the gin trap is set. This is the very big gin trap. This is 40 kgs, this thing. I mean, this is your foot. Not very nice, is it? However, let's have a look now. We have a little surprise. Okay. Be very careful here. All right. So imagine bringing this back from Malawi. Okay. So I get to the airport, and I got my box, and I've covered this thing in wire and bits of metal, so it goes through the X-ray. You can't see it or anything else, and it goes to the X-ray, and there it is. So the man at the X-ray machine comes. What's that? So I say, what? What is that? And I say, oh, it's a piece of metal. And he goes, no, but what is it? And he knows exactly what it is. I say, it's a souvenir. That's okay. Okay, hold it at the top. A practical demonstration of the power of a gin trap. This is a medium-sized gin trap all the way from Africa. We've got a lockup with about 50 of these things in. Hit it in the middle.
There should be a risk assessment for this.
Yes, they should. This is contrary to all health and safety. Okay, off you go. You don't have to hit it hard, by the way. We'll do it from the top down. Just do it from the top down. Danger. New species from Marbu. A new bat, new plants, and 3 new species of snake. This is the first ever picture of this one. I actually discovered this because I stepped on it, and this is the picture after I just stepped on it. And that is obviously one way to find a new species of viper. But it's very beautiful. This is actually the snake I stepped on. We didn't kill it, we collected it alive. And it's got these lovely golden tips to the scales. It's a bush viper. And what's very interesting about this one, it has a little yellow tip to the tail, which it acts as a lure, which then probably brings in leaf little frogs, which it then eats. This is a Dipsodoboa, a tree snake, and a Phylothamnus. A little bit for worse for wear, this one. But the nearest relative of this one is quite interesting, is in the Congo, which then supports the idea that these forest patches were once connected and then they've retreated over time. This comes to the fourth of our dangers, as we're talking about snakes. Snakes. There's two snakes that I'm really scared of, and that's really the mambas, the black mamba particularly. I've had a couple of nasty incidents with those. But you don't get those inside wet forest, inside rainforest, or even high up in mountains. You get the gaboon viper inside the forest. Now, it's not an aggressive snake. It's actually a very peaceful animal, but it's the largest viper in Africa and has inch and a half long fangs. And what it does is it just relies on camouflage, so it doesn't move out of the way. In the leaf litter, it's extremely, extremely well camouflaged, and it doesn't move. So you've got to step on it to get it to bite you, but when it does bite you, it's pretty dangerous. It's a cytotoxic snake. I was working in northern Tanzania in the Usambara Mountains. I was coming across these practically every day, and I talked to Professor Kim Howell at the University of Dar es Salaam, and I was telling him about this. He said, okay, you get bitten, you just got to get to hospital in 6 hours, within 6 hours. He said, you'll lose your leg, but you'll live. Very nice. New species of chameleon. Two of these. This is the Nanticambiae. These are the pygmy chameleons. There you can see a fully grown adult. These are all from Marbu, and obviously new species of butterfly. That's actually named after my daughter. That's Poppy, that one. Yes, Poppy, that's yours. That's Poppyana, and this is obviously named after Malaika. These two are not yet described. Anyway, the second important event for Marbu was actually probably the Google ad. 5, 6, 7, 8 years after its discovery and news got out, finally Google decide that they're interested in making a little story about this, and so they make something called a Google story. Every country has 2 or 3 of these, and it's really about the innovative use of Google to create things. So in this case, it was all about the use of Google Earth.
People say that there's nothing left to discover in this world, but there are new species to be discovered, lost worlds and lost Edens to be found.
Scientists are driven by a real thrill of finding something which is not known. It could be a fact which is not known, it can be a species which is not known. Just putting your little bit into this massive jigsaw puzzle of life.
We concentrate so much on thinking about going into space and doing all of this, and yet on our doorstep, still, there's pockets of habitat that hardly anyone has been to.
Some years ago, I was working on an isolated mountain in Malawi, and I noticed there were similar mountains over the border in Mozambique. There was nothing written about these mountains. There were no biological records at all. The area was largely inaccessible because of the war and the fighting that had been occurring for the last 30 years. So when I returned to the UK, I was able to see Mount Mulanje in southern Malawi, which is a site I knew very well. I was then able to look across northern Mozambique. And then as I zoomed in, I saw this dark green patch suddenly emerge. That was tremendously exciting because this could be a lost rainforest. You can just see the summit of Mount Marbu coming up behind this main woodland ridge. So we just entered Marbu Forest, and immediately you can see a big difference. Look at the size of the trees. When you enter into a forest, everything changes. The forest is cool, the canopy is high, and it's very shady. Life is buzzing all around you. This is the butterfly that I stood for 2 days in the forest clearing trying to catch. Here we are. This is a juvenile Nanticambiae Baylissi. I was lucky enough to find the first one of these. Ooh. Since the main expedition, we've discovered approximately 12 new species for Mount Marbu. What medicinal use does this bracket fungi have? Majida.
That is medicinal for back.
The knowledge, information that we could benefit from as humankind could be sitting here all around us.
If you were a young scientist, you need to have some sort of hope that you can contribute something. It's not all known and you're just picking up the last crumbs off the table. There's actually a lot out there that we don't know.
To actually find a hidden rainforest, which turns out to be the largest in southern Africa, shows that we don't have all the answers and we don't know what's out there. You're always asking questions. As soon as you think you have the answers, then new questions, new doors open. That's the beauty of life.
And of course, this is all immensely hard work. I'd like to dispel one of the myths that we all go around with packs of and eat spam out of tins and all sorts of unhealthy stuff. Fresh prawns brought on ice from the Mozambican coast up to the main forest camp in Mabu. Enjoyed over a fine bottle of malt on a rainy evening in the rainforest. Okay. We need to obviously mention some of the threats to these sites. Hello. Like I say, they're not traditionally from, obviously deforestation, but it's not from commercial reasons. It's mainly for agriculture, like clearing patches inside the forest to plant potatoes or corn or maize in this case. And on this occasion, the tree is actually chopped down to get the honey from the bee's nest at the top. And you come across this quite a lot. Also in Mabu, they chop down trees to get the honey. They don't chop down trees to get the wood. But these threats are real, and particularly on Mount Inago and Mount Namuli, where these are taken. This is Inago, I think this is Namuli. These two sites are severely degraded as a result of this. Fire is obviously the other big one. People use fire to clear their lands for cultivation in the ground surrounding the forest. These fires are out of control. The wind comes up, it hits the edge of the forest, and it takes a metre of the forest away. So it's really about the frequency of the fire and how often this occurs, and eventually over time the edges of the forest will start to reduce. I'd like to then introduce you to a very new tool, that for me anyway, which is the drone. I've started using this recently, and you'll see why in a minute. But I'm a little bit hooked, I have to say. It's an extremely useful tool, especially if you're working in mountains and inaccessible places. The only problem is the battery life can be a little bit short. And recently I lost my drone, and we had to we do all sorts of things like analysing the remote controller to get the CSV and text files out to find out its last location. It's a long story. But we found it 3 days later. Anyway, here's some footage from the recent trip to Mount Mabu. This is the riverine next to the camp. And this is from the summit. You can see at the speed at which those clouds are moving. It's a particularly windy day, and this is the third time I've ever used this drone. I thought, oh, well, there we go. That's the end of that one. But it worked, it came back, and amazingly, it could take these very strong winds. And this is the reason it's also wobbling a bit here, it's very strong crosswind. Okay. So finally, new site. Again, this was a site that I found using Google Earth. I found it 4 years ago. Well, I noticed it 4 years ago, and it's taken me 4 years to actually get the time and the resources together to actually go and have a look at this place. Here we can see high-resolution satellite imagery looking down. You can see this volcanic-like shape with a basin of what looks like forest in the middle. Again, you can twist and turn some of these images, and you can get an idea of what it looks like. Likewise here, this is using Global Mapper, and then also with the contours. So this is a place I've been meaning to go and have a look at for quite a long time. And in February this year, I was able to mount a small expedition to go and have a look. These images here show me getting close to it, and this is it, here we go. Very pleased at what I saw when I first came here. it's a lot higher than I thought it was going to be, which is good, because I thought it might be a little bit, And then I could see what I could see on the satellite imagery here, the start of this fringe of trees, of forest, emerging just over the lip at the top. Obviously, this is one of the reasons I bought the drone. I went to we had to walk. We left the vehicles, and it was a few hours walk, whatever, to get to the base. And I had 3 drone batteries. The first time I had these pre-programs, I was going to try and map it, of course, and it lost communication with the controller. But we got some nice pictures coming up, and as you can see, how smooth the sides of this mountain are. They are very smooth granite. We talked to the local people. Has anybody ever been up there? Do you know anybody who's ever been up there? History, in myth, in legend, in days of yore. Nobody's been up there. You cannot get up there. So what we have here is a site with a patch of forest that no human has ever set foot in. So this is the next destination. This is the next site. So let me show you some drone footage of this. Got it. All right. Here we go. So this is the first ever footage taken from this site. You cannot get up here. No human has ever been up here. This forest has never had anybody there at all. It is untouched by humankind. And coming back to my first slide, these mountains are old, 130 to 500 million years old. It looks like a small fringe of forest, and that's what you can see from below. But the satellite imagery tells a different story. The satellite imagery, looking down, shows that there's a big basin of forest. So the reason I got the drone was to look at this. I suspected this was the case because the surrounding land was heavily cultivated, and then the mountain had this basin of intact forest. That's a bit strange because in Africa, if their surrounding land is heavily cultivated, then the forest is likely to be disturbed as well. So then I suspected that this might be the case, that actually you can't get up there, and no human has come up there. There we go, look at the sides. So we're going to climb this. And here we can go, the drone's now getting closer, and it's just starting to look over the edge of the crater. And as we come closer and closer, we can see the mountain revealing its secrets. Legend has it that there's a tribe of little people living in the forest. You can see one there. And up it goes, and indeed, there is the forest. There's the forest, and this is exactly what I thought we were looking at on the satellite imagery. This is the first ever footage taken of this site. And this forest has never had a human being inside it. So imagine what we would find if we went and had a look. There's very few places in the world where you can say this. Beautiful, amazing. It's certainly not as big as Marbu Forest, but it's certainly big enough to have endemic and new species. Coming back. So, we're going to need a climbing team to get up there. No human has ever set foot in this forest. And these mountains are very old. So this forest has been isolated and intact for a very long time. Therefore, what would we find if we looked? The start, I've got to put this in, gave me the inspiration to go exploring in the first case was actually the book by Robert Gooden, Butterflies, produced in the 1970s that I got given at the age of 7. And there's actually this picture here on one of the pages of a guy collecting butterflies in the rainforest that inspired me to say, hey, that's what I want to do. In summary then, just to finish, certainly the age of exploration is not over. It did not all happen in the Victorian era. And hopefully, through this presentation, I've demonstrated that actually with modern techniques and tools, we are actually exploring deeper and further than was possible in the past. Thank you very much.